On the morning of February 28, 2026, the world changed. Without warning, the United States and Israel launched one of the most devastating military operations in modern history. Missiles rained down on Tehran, explosions lit up the sky, and within hours, the man who had ruled this nation with an iron fist for over 35 years, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, was dead, killed in his own compound. Over 4,000 soldiers and commanders were killed in the opening days alone. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait all reported missile and drone strikes launched in retaliation. You can see every one of those locations right here on this map. The entire Middle East was on fire. But here's what nobody was asking in all that chaos. Why was this country already broken before the bombs even fell? Because look at this number, a GDP per capita of just $4,074. That's what this nation earned per person in a year. Now look at its neighbors on this map. Qatar sits at over $80,000. Saudi Arabia at nearly $30,000. Kuwait and the UAE aren't far behind. Same region, same desert, same sun. And yet the gap between them is almost incomprehensible. Now here's where it gets truly strange. This country sits on the third largest oil reserves on the entire planet. Only Venezuela and Saudi Arabia have more. More oil than Kuwait, more oil than the UAE, more oil than Iraq. And yet it remains one of the poorest nations in its own neighborhood. How does a country drowning in oil end up this poor? Because it wasn't always like this. Go back to the 1960s and 70s, and this is a completely different story. Tehran was nicknamed the Paris of the Middle East. The economy was growing at 10 to 12% every single year. Women were in universities. Foreign companies were lining up to invest. This country was on a trajectory to become one of the most powerful economies on Earth. It had the oil, the people, the land, the geography, everything a nation could want. So what went wrong? Let's understand that. Look at this footage. Take a moment and really look at it. Women walking freely in the streets, music playing in open cafes, people laughing, living, breathing without fear. Tehran looked like it could have been Paris, London, or New York. This was a country on top of the world, confident, modern, and completely alive. Then 1979 happened. And to understand what came next, you have to understand why the revolution happened in the first place. The Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, was a modernizer on the surface. He built highways, universities, industries. But underneath that, he was a brutal dictator backed by the United States and Britain, who had actually helped put him back in power after a CIA-engineered coup in 1953 that removed the country's democratically elected prime minister. The Shah's secret police, Savak, tortured and disappeared thousands of political opponents. Wealth from the oil boom was flooding in, but almost none of it was reaching ordinary people. The gap between the rich elite in Tehran and the poor majority across the country was enormous and growing. People were furious, and into that fury stepped Ayatollah Khomeini, a religious scholar living in exile who promised justice, dignity, and an end to foreign interference. Millions followed him, the Shah fled, and in February 1979, the Islamic Republic was born. But the revolution that was supposed to free the people ended up building a different kind of cage. The new government replaced one form of authoritarianism with another. Political opposition was crushed. Free press was eliminated. The economy, instead of being rebuilt for the people, was handed over to powerful religious foundations called bonyads, sprawling conglomerates that controlled everything from factories to airlines to real estate, all completely outside government oversight, all answering only to the supreme leader. These institutions became engines of corruption on a colossal scale. Billions meant for public development vanished. Transparency International consistently ranked this country among the most corrupt on Earth, sitting at around 149 out of 180 nations in recent years. That's not a small problem. That's a system built to fail its own people. And then came the nuclear question, which changed everything. In the early 2000s, the world discovered that this country had been secretly developing a nuclear program. The government called it peaceful energy. The West called it a weapons program. And from that moment, the economic walls got even higher. The United Nations piled on sanctions. The European Union cut off trade. The SWIFT banking network, which allows nations to send and receive money internationally, was completely blocked. Oil exports collapsed. The currency went into freefall. By 2024, inflation was running above 40%. The rial had lost over 99% of its value compared to the 1970s. Ordinary people were watching their savings disappear in real time. Now compare that to what happened next door. Saudi Arabia, also authoritarian, also oil-dependent, aligned with the West, protected the petrodollar, and was never isolated. Qatar hosted a massive American military base on its soil, played every side of every conflict diplomatically, and quietly became the richest country per capita on the planet. The difference between these nations was never resources. It was never intelligence or culture or geography. It was one single thing: which side of the global power structure you stood on. This is what economists call a sanctions trap. You're too isolated to attract investment, too punished to reform, too cut off from global trade to grow. And every time a deal gets close, like the 2015 nuclear agreement that briefly lifted sanctions and gave the economy a gasp of air, domestic hardliners on one side and foreign political shifts on the other tear it apart. In 2018, the United States simply walked away from that deal. Sanctions came back, harder than before. The economy cratered again, and the people paid the price. Not the leaders, not the Revolutionary Guards, not the Bunyad elites, the people. Regional tensions made everything worse. Billions of dollars that could have built schools and hospitals were poured into proxy wars across Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and Iraq, supporting Hezbollah, supporting the Houthis, funding militias across the region. The government told its people this was resistance and dignity. But what it really was, a broke country spending money it didn't have on wars it couldn't win, while its own citizens stood in breadlines. And that brings us back to February 28, 2026. Ali Khamenei had ruled since 1989, over 3.5 decades of tightening grip, deepening isolation, and a nation slowly suffocating under the weight of its own system and the world's punishment. The strikes were aimed at dismantling the nuclear program and triggering regime change. His son, Mojtaba, was named the new supreme leader within days. The war is still ongoing as you watch this. The Strait of Hormuz, through which nearly 20% of the world's oil flows, is under threat. The global economy is holding its breath. But here is the question I genuinely want you to think about, and I want to read your answer in the comments. Was this country's poverty the result of its own choices? A failed revolution, a corrupt system, an ideology that prized confrontation over prosperity? Or was it something else? A nation that dared to resist the global order and was slowly, deliberately, systematically strangled for it over 40 years? Because the bombs in 2026 didn't destroy this country's future. That work had already been done, quietly, without cameras, without breaking news banners, over 4 decades, long before the first missile was ever launched. So tell me, what do you think? Was Iran the author of its own downfall, or was it always going to end this way?